During the spring in Japan, two girls forged an unbreakable bond of sisterhood. They agreed that the ties they shared would be stronger than family or blood relatives. Both of them bit their thumbs and sealed the promise with blood. From that day on, they became sisters, and the tears finally came to an end. A blood oath became the symbol of a bond that not even the gods could break. Then, in another world, another pact was about to take shape. Inside a crowded adventurers' guild, a heated discussion turned toward giants. A knight confidently claimed he knew everything there was to know about them. In his eyes, giants were nothing more than cruel, savage creatures with little intelligence. The guild master admitted that most people believed the same thing, but warned that those words would not be welcomed by everyone in that town. The knight brushed the warning aside. To him, those stories about giants being honorable warriors who once fought against the gods were nothing more than ancient fairy tales. In the modern age, giants had become dim-witted mercenaries willing to take any filthy job for enough money. Their very name had even become an insult for people stuck in the past. The guild master calmly replied that there was still something worth saying about giants. Not long ago, they had already defeated the very creature the knight had traveled all this way to hunt. The claim immediately caught the knight off guard. The guildmaster revealed that the target was an ancient ice dragon over 200 years old. The knight proudly explained that hunting such a legendary beast was exactly why an apostle knight like himself had journeyed from the capital. Before the conversation could continue, a woman entered the guild and politely apologized for interrupting. She informed the guildmaster that the mission was complete before placing a crystal on the table. The knight's attention instantly shifted toward her. Only then did he notice that she had only one arm. The woman simply asked if any further proof was necessary. The guildmaster trusted her completely. If she said the mission was finished, then it was finished. The crystal she delivered was the proof itself. It was the crystal of the ancient ice dragon. Curious about the visitor, the woman asked who the knight was. The guildmaster explained that he had come from the capital to slay the dragon, after a powerful minister passed the request along. Before things could become awkward, he reminded both sides to keep the conversation civil. The woman immediately lowered her head and sincerely apologized. Even if it had never been her intention, she admitted that she had taken the knight's quarry and caused him a great injustice. She could only hope he would forgive her. The unexpected humility stunned everyone in the room. The knight smiled and accepted the apology without hesitation. At the same time, he found himself fascinated by the woman's graceful manners. She carried herself like royalty. She could easily have been a noblewoman, or perhaps even a princess from another kingdom. His curiosity only grew stronger. He asked whether the strange clothes she wore belonged to her, then wondered if she had been summoned from another world. After all, people who died in accidents were sometimes transported into this world. The question left the woman visibly confused. Realizing he had skipped the formalities, the knight introduced himself. Nathaniel D.S., a servant of the Holy Orthodox Church and one of its legendary 12 Apostle Knights. Nathaniel went on to explain that people summoned from other worlds were often blessed by the goddess with extraordinary abilities known as cheats. Unable to hide his curiosity, he politely asked which divine power she had received. The woman paused for a moment before finally understanding what he meant. Then she gently revealed something completely unexpected. She had refused the blessing. Using a cheat would have been unfair, and she believed no one should choose an unfair advantage. Nathaniel burst into laughter. To him, the idea was impossible. Who would ever reject the blessing of a goddess? If she truly possessed no cheat, then one question remained. How had she managed to defeat an ancient ice dragon? The story sounded just as unbelievable as those old legends about noble giants. And little by little, Nathaniel began to wonder if the impossible standing before him might actually be real. The guild master finally lost his patience and called Nathaniel an idiot. At the same time, the one-armed woman calmly drew a small knife and aimed it straight at him. Nathaniel looked surprised. The woman demanded that he take those words back. To the giants, pride meant everything. Insulting their honor was something she simply could not ignore. Nathaniel tried to respond, but the guild master desperately stepped in, begging both sides to stop before things got any worse. Nathaniel remained unfazed. Pointing a blade at one of the apostle knights, even as a joke, was dangerous. The only one likely to get hurt would be the one holding it. Before anyone could react, someone grabbed the woman by the arm and effortlessly lifted her into the air. The stranger casually remarked how unbelievably light she was. Nathaniel immediately objected. That was no way to treat a lady. He walked closer while the woman struggled to break free from the grip. Curious, he questioned what she meant about the pride of giants. Then the knife slipped from her hand. The bracelet on her wrist rang out with a sharp metallic chime, almost like a signal. An instant later, the guild exploded into chaos. A giant woman crashed straight through the building with a powerful kick, leaving the room in ruins. Everyone froze in shock. The giant's first concern was whether the woman was safe. The one-armed woman calmly apologized for skipping the introductions. She revealed that they belonged to the Kyugoku clan. Her name was Hinako. The giant standing beside her was Ellis, her little sister. Hinako explained that other giant clans often referred to them as the smallest of giants. Then her expression turned cold. She pointed her blade toward Nathaniel and offered to answer his question about the pride of giants herself. The guild master immediately panicked and begged her to let it go. Nathaniel simply did not know any better, and none of them had intended any disrespect. Before Hinako could respond, Ellis stepped forward. She admitted that giants treasured their pride above all else. But true giants also believed in justice, and those who valued justice could never forget to show mercy to the weak. She gently asked Hinako to forgive them, or, if a fight was still necessary, to allow her to take Hinako's place instead. After a brief pause, Hinako agreed. If Ellis insisted, then she would show the weakling a little mercy. Instead of attacking, Hinako asked Nathaniel a question. Since he had traveled from the capital, perhaps he knew an otherworlder named Hidaka Junko, or maybe he had heard of a giant clan called the Gorm. Nathaniel admitted that neither name sounded familiar. Hinako revealed that those names belonged to Ellis's true family. The two sisters had been searching for their separated relatives ever since. Nathaniel could only lower his head and sincerely apologize. He wished he could offer more help. Around them, the injured people inside the guild continued groaning in pain. With nothing more to gain, Ellis quietly turned to leave. Hinako sighed at the unfortunate outcome before informing the guild master that they would collect their reward another time. She even told him to deduct the repair costs from their payment if necessary. The guild master accepted the offer. But before he could say anything else, Hinako casually stomped on the floor while walking away, shaking the battered building and making the already injured guild master groan in pain once again. As they departed, Nathaniel silently watched Hinako disappear into the distance. Outside, Ellis gently suggested that it might be better to stay calm and avoid dangerous confrontations like the one that had just happened. Hinako reminded her that giants valued their pride above everything else. That was the way she had raised her. Ellis admitted she understood, but before she could continue, Hinako cut her off. As her little sister, Ellis should naturally follow the creed of the giants just as she did. Then Hinako shifted the conversation completely. She corrected Ellis's posture, telling her to stop slouching, keep her legs together, and walk with smaller steps. Ellis had wondered about that for a long time and finally asked whether there was really any point in doing all of it. Hinako simply replied that someone of Ellis's size needed proper manners more than anyone. After all, manners defined a person, and as her little sister, following her example was only natural. Ellis could only give an awkward smile and a nervous laugh. Hinako immediately noticed her posture slipping again. This time, Ellis could only admit that she was right. Ellis couldn't help thinking about what had happened back at the guild. People kept calling giants crude and slow, even though they had completely misunderstood them. Hinako simply pointed out that Ellis had rushed to protect her without hesitation. She had moved with grace and courage. Only then did Ellis notice Hinako's missing arm. Hinako brushed it off as if it were nothing, and the two quietly continued their walk. Meanwhile, in an abandoned hideout, Nathaniel met with someone in secret. He explained that he had a job. The target was a member of that giant woman's true family. That was the role he needed the giant to play. The giant immediately corrected him. To giants, that wasn't called family. It was called a clan. Nathaniel jokingly wondered if he had just hurt the giant's pride. The giant exploded with laughter. Pride meant nothing to him. All he cared about was gold and meat. Nathaniel calmly promised that both would be provided. Surprised, Nathaniel mentioned that he had always heard giants were an incredibly proud race. The giant dismissed the idea without a second thought. He wasn't one of them anymore. He was only a stray, a giant with no family, no clan, and according to giant tradition, a stray wasn't even considered a true giant anymore. Back at their cabin, Ellis happily threw herself onto the giant nest inside. After spending so many days freezing while hunting the ancient ice dragon, having a roof over their heads again felt like a luxury. Hinako immediately reminded her to act with a little more dignity. Ellis only smiled, pointing out that no one else was around to see. The sisters settled down to rest. Hinako gently stroked Ellis's hair before noticing how rough it had become. They would need to buy more oil soon. Ellis looked over with concern. The dragon hunt had exhausted Hinako. She suggested spending the night in a proper human inn instead of another stable. Hinako softly declined. There was no place more comfortable than sleeping beside Ellis. The words brought tears to Ellis's eyes. Even after everything, they still hadn't found her true family. Hinako admitted she had hoped someone from the capital might recognize the Gorm clan. But the Gorm were wandering nomads. With giants capable of traveling enormous distances, there was no telling where they had gone. Hinako then reflected on her own past. She and her real sister had been struck by a train before arriving in this world. If people truly could be summoned from another world, then her sister had to be somewhere out there too. Alice smiled with renewed hope. One day they would find them. Hinako assured her they would. She believed it without question. Feeling encouraged, Alice volunteered to fetch some water while Hinako prepared their beds. The peaceful moment didn't last. Outside the cabin, Hinako suddenly sensed something. She looked around. Nothing. Then, without warning, a man slammed into her from behind. Even he looked surprised that the ambush had worked. He quickly called out to the others, announcing that he had captured her. One of the mercenaries admitted they had been warned that Hinako was an otherworld. Someone like that was expected to possess one of those legendary cheats. Their employer had advised bringing far more men than usual. The group ignored the warning and pushed ahead with the plan anyway. The overwhelming numbers proved enough. Hinako collapsed to the ground and lost consciousness. As darkness consumed her, an old memory resurfaced. She found herself back inside a church. She was lying across one of the wooden benches. A woman leaned over her, reminding her that God and heaven were watching over them. She wanted their bond to last forever. A bond between sisters that could never fade. Hinako tried to answer, but the woman interrupted before a single word could escape. She wanted Hinako no matter what, even if it meant standing against both the sun and the moon. Hinako slowly opened her eyes inside a dark, worn-down room. A light flickered on. Standing before her was Nathaniel. He greeted the awakened giant with a calm smile and apologized for the rough treatment. For a while, he had honestly wondered whether she would ever wake up again. After all, otherworlders were worth a fortune. Hinako immediately questioned what he meant. Nathaniel explained that everything depended on the cheat an otherworlder possessed. If her ability wasn't suited for combat, that only made her more valuable. The power, like returning through time after death for example, could be sold for an incredible price. Only then did Hinako realize the truth. This was human trafficking. She questioned how someone from the church could justify such a crime when their duty was supposedly to serve God. Nathaniel answered without the slightest shame. The church needed money just like everyone else. Selling Hinako would more than make up for the reward he had lost by failing to claim the ancient ice dragon. And with someone as beautiful as her, he planned to enjoy himself before taking her to the capital. Hinako remained calm. She simply wondered how he would explain all of this when he finally stood before his god. Nathaniel's expression instantly twisted with hatred. That god was never his. As far as he was concerned, the goddess only blessed invasive vermin while everyone else struggled through miserable lives. How could he ever worship such a fool? After venting his rage, Nathaniel apologized for the harsh language. Then he smiled. It seemed their conversation had bought enough time. Her little sister had finally arrived. Elsewhere, Alice followed several men through the forest. They assured her that Hinako was just ahead. Even better, members of her true family were waiting there as well. One of the men claimed her older brother had been searching for her and desperately wanted to meet her again. The mention of her real clan filled Alice with hope. Still, she quietly rested her hand on the shovel strapped behind her. As they reached the meeting place, a giant stepped forward. He introduced himself as Ud of the Gorm clan. He admitted they had abandoned Alice when she was young and begged for forgiveness, insisting they had no other choice. Alice listened carefully. If that story had truly been real, she might have believed him, but something immediately felt wrong. While pretending to accept his explanation, Alice quietly searched the area. In the distance, she spotted the building where Hinako was being held. Inside, Nathaniel watched the entire scene unfold. After being humiliated at the guild, he decided the perfect revenge was to have Alice slaughtered right in front of Hinako. And once Hinako broke, he would finally force her to reveal the true nature of her cheat. Alice lowered her head for a brief moment, then she smiled. The only thing she could appreciate was just how terrible Ud was at acting. The Gorm didn't speak with such a strange accent. The fake had exposed himself. Without another word, Alice swung her shovel straight into its face. The impact shocked everyone. Before they could recover, she launched another relentless assault. Calling upon the power of the Wind Jin, her weapon shot forward with incredible force. It burst into the room where Hinako was imprisoned, and sliced clean through Nathaniel's arm. The Apostle Knight screamed in horror. At that exact moment, Hinako's bracelet rang out once again. The signal reached Alice immediately. She understood everything. She told Hinako not to put herself in danger. She would deal with every last one of them, and be there soon. Inside the room, Hinako reached for a massive axe. Nathaniel, barely able to speak through the pain, threatened her one last time. By opposing him, she had made an enemy of the church. Divine punishment would surely await her. Hinako looked at him without fear. People like him were all the same. They hid behind words like God, promises, and sacred bonds, using them as nothing more than convenient masks. Those who lacked virtue were the true enemies. With those words, Hinako summoned an enormous spirit. Nathaniel's terrified scream echoed through the room. The giant. As the battle reached its climax, another memory surfaced inside Hinako's mind. She remembered asking whether they should stop calling each other sisters. The other girl casually agreed. She was graduating soon, and it was time to leave all of that behind. Hinako couldn't understand. Their bond as sisters was supposed to be stronger than blood. The girl laughed. She admitted she had never taken any of it seriously. Hinako had even challenged heaven itself for the sake of that promise. That only made the laughter louder. The girl mocked Hinako's innocence, calling her hopelessly sheltered. Confused, Hinako asked what had made them sisters in the first place. The answer shattered everything. Everyone else had been doing it. Hinako came from a wealthy family, so keeping her close had simply been useful. In reality, she had always found Hinako unbearably naive. Pretending to be sisters had been nothing more than a burden. She regretted ever making the promise at all. Overwhelmed by betrayal, heartbreak, and anger, Hinako shoved the girl. Just as a train came rushing toward them, that was the last time she ever saw her. The memory faded. Alice hurried to Hinako's side, anxiously checking whether she had been injured. Hinako reassured her that she was unharmed before asking about the giant outside. Alice confirmed what they both already knew. He had never been one of her clan. He was only an imposter. Hinako gently comforted her. There was no need to look so sad. The family who had been separated from them, Alice's true clan, and both of their beloved older sisters, they would find them someday. She believed it with all her heart. Alice finally smiled. Giants were brave, and prouder than anyone else. And above them all, Hinako stood as the greatest giant of them all. Far away, another young woman suddenly shivered for no apparent reason. Her little sister immediately noticed and asked what was wrong. The woman brushed it off as nothing. Her sister laughed, wondering what could possibly frighten a hero. An evil spirit? Maybe even the demon lord? The woman quietly smiled. Whatever it was, it felt like something far greater. The town was already in flames. Buildings crumbled as wave after wave of orcs and goblins poured in from every direction. No one ever imagined a peaceful village like this could be overrun by monsters. One villager revealed that a messenger had already been sent to the guild in the neighboring town. All they had to do was survive until the adventurers arrived. But even on horseback, the trip would take at least half a day. At that rate, no one believed the village would still be standing. Then the entire ground began to shake. At first, everyone thought it was an earthquake. But something far more unbelievable was approaching. Alice suddenly rushed past the panicking crowd, leaving everyone frozen in shock at the sight of a towering giant. Hinako immediately called out to Alice and ordered her onto the rooftop. Alice picked Hinako up, tossed her onto the roof, then climbed up herself in one smooth motion. From above, Hinako announced that they were the adventurers dispatched by the guild. She instructed everyone to evacuate immediately and leave the battle to them. After quickly surveying the battlefield, she identified the enemy forces advancing from the north. Most were small monsters with no medium or large class threats in sight. She assigned Alice to wipe them out, and Alice wasted no time carrying out the order. The villagers could only stare in disbelief. A giant standing in their town, an otherworlder giving commands without hesitation. One of the men finally recognized them. They were the legendary pair known as the smallest giants. Meanwhile, a terrified mother and her son found themselves cornered by a pack of charging orcs. Frozen with fear, they could only watch the monsters close in. Before the attack could land, a lone man stepped between them. It was the weapon forger. He crushed the orcs with overwhelming force, then urged the mother and child to run while he handled the rest. Watching from the rooftop, Hinako noticed the situation immediately. She informed Alice that someone already had the northwest under control, so they shifted their focus to securing the northeast instead. Earlier that day, back at the guild, news of the monster horde had left everyone stunned. A breathless messenger reported that nothing like this had ever happened before. The villagers capable of fighting were desperately holding the monsters back, but no one knew how much longer they could survive. Another adventurer pointed out that the village lay beyond the mountain. Even if they left immediately, reaching it in time would be nearly impossible. Others questioned how many fighters they could even gather on such short notice. Just as panic spread through the guild, Hinako stepped forward with a simple solution. If they traveled by giant, they might actually make it. Back at the village, the monster horde was no longer advancing. They couldn't. Alice was literally standing on top of them. She laughed as she looked over the battlefield, convinced that was the last of the monsters. Hinako gave her credit, but Alice immediately brushed it off. Hinako only gave the commands. Alice was the one who did all the fighting. Jumping over mountains to reach the village had been the hardest part. The monsters themselves never stood a chance. At the same time, another warrior had been battling on a different side of the village. The grateful townspeople surrounded him with endless praise. The village chief personally thanked the hero for saving everyone and invited him to a banquet prepared in his honor. Watching from a distance, Alice couldn't help laughing at the difference. Heroes received celebrations. Adventurers simply got paid. She even joked that maybe it was because she was a foreigner. Hinako became curious about the title of hero, wondering if it was reserved only for the bravest warriors. Alice realized this was Hinako's first time seeing one and explained the truth. Hero was simply another name for otherworlders. Long ago, the title belonged only to the champions who fought the Lord of all demons for humanity. Over time, however, people began using it for every otherworlder who arrived. There was a practical reason behind it. Most otherworlders possessed incredible cheat abilities, and many of them were surprisingly easy to flatter. Calling them heroes often put them in a good mood, making them far more willing to help. It was simply one of the world's clever survival tactics. Hinako quietly watched the celebrated hero. Like her, he was also in Otherworld. At that very moment, the hero finally noticed her as well. And the instant their eyes met, he immediately realized there was something different about that mysterious girl. With the battle finally over, the village erupted into celebration. Everyone enjoyed the victory feast. But while the rest of the town celebrated, Hinako and Alice were busy searching through the wreckage. Hinako reminded Alice to be careful while digging through the collapsed buildings, making sure nothing important was damaged. Alice acknowledged the warning and continued clearing away the rubble. Then someone suddenly approached them. After noticing they had skipped the banquet, he had come looking for them. Hinako calmly explained that cleaning up after the battle and removing the debris were included in the job they had accepted. The man looked at her uniform for a moment. Then he immediately recognized something unexpected. She was Japanese. Hinako introduced herself by asking about the name Hidaka Junko. The hero apologized. The name meant nothing to him. As for the giant clan, today was the first time he had ever seen a giant. He regretted that he couldn't offer any useful information. Hinako thanked him anyway. After spending 2 years in this world, she and Ellis still hadn't found a single clue. The hero then shared his own story. He had arrived only 6 months earlier. On his way home from work, he tried to save a little girl from being hit by a truck. The next thing he remembered, he woke up in this strange world. To him, it felt like a dream, a fantasy world filled with swords and magic, just like the light novels he used to read. Hinako became curious. She asked about swords, magic, and light novels. The hero was surprised she didn't recognize any of those things. He wondered if she had never watched anime or read books back in Japan. Hinako politely apologized, embarrassed that such common knowledge was completely unfamiliar to her. The hero simply laughed it off. To him, it was nothing more than random otaku trivia anyway. As they continued talking, he started paying closer attention to her. Her elegant manners, her refined way of speaking, everything about her suggested she had grown up in a wealthy family. Looking at her delicate hands, he couldn't help feeling sorry for everything she must have endured. This world was far harsher than anyone deserved. Trying to lift the mood, he returned to the topic of the sisters she had been searching for. He sincerely hoped that if Hidaka Junko had also been brought into this world, the two sisters would at least be reunited someday. Hinako remained silent. The hero admitted that while being transported to a fantasy world had once sounded like a dream, living through it was far more difficult than he had imagined. Still, meeting another person from Japan made him feel a little less alone. Hinako then asked another question. In all those light novels and anime, how did people usually end up in another world? The hero thought for a moment. Most stories involve traffic accidents, overwork, sudden heart attacks, or other untimely deaths. Before he could continue, Hinako interrupted. She asked about murder. The hero looked at her in confusion. Then Hinako quietly revealed the truth. She and her sister had died after being hit by a train. But the train wasn't the whole story. The one who pushed her sister onto the tracks was Hinako herself. She confessed that she was a murderer. Even Ellis lowered her head. The hero froze. Unable to understand why she would do something like that, he nervously waited for an explanation. Hinako admitted that what had been done to her was something she could never forgive. But regardless of the reason, murder was still murder. Someone like her could never be considered a good person. She believed that even heaven would never forgive what she had done. The hero stood there speechless. Before anyone could say another word, a frantic villager came running toward them. He called for the giant lady, desperately asking for help. A child was in critical condition. Without wasting a second, Hinako rushed off. The hero turned toward the village chief in disbelief. He had been told that no one in the village had been hurt, yet there was still a child fighting for his life. Hinako and Ellis hurried to a small cabin that had been turned into an emergency shelter. Inside, the scene was horrifying. The room was filled with wounded villagers. Some had suffered devastating injuries, with limbs torn away by the monsters. The hero followed behind them. The brutal reality of the attack left him speechless. Hinako immediately prepared one of her healing potions. A worried villager hesitated, wondering if something so valuable should really be used. Hinako reassured him without a second thought. The potion would at least ease the child's suffering. The villager reluctantly agreed. The hero finally saw the boy. The child kept calling for his mother. His arms and legs had already been severed by the monsters. Hinako quietly asked where the boy's mother was. The villager explained that the child had only recently drifted into the village. No one even knew whether he still had any family. Most of the people living there were drifters and loners. That was exactly why they had been forced to stand on the front lines whenever monsters attacked. The villager then revealed one final truth. The village chief had chosen not to tell anyone about them. The boy cried out in unbearable pain, desperately calling for his mother. Hinako's heart sank. She gently cradled his head before pulling him into a tight embrace. The boy weakly asked if she was really his mother. Without hesitation, Hinako told him she was. Still struggling to breathe, the child wondered why she had taken so long to come. He had been waiting for her all this time. Even the hero found it difficult to watch. Hinako simply held the boy closer and apologized, promising that she would never leave his side again. The child admitted that everything around him felt dark, cold, and frightening. Hinako softly comforted him. Very soon he would be in heaven. The boy asked what heaven was like. Hinako described a warm place where no one ever went hungry, a place filled with kind people and endless light, a place where he would finally be safe. The boy smiled faintly. If such a place really existed, then he hoped he could go there. With his final strength, he thanked the kind older sister holding him. A small smile appeared on his face one last time. Hinako gently reassured him that heaven was real. So was God. And she was certain he would reach that peaceful place. The room fell silent. Alice and the hero watched without saying a word as Hinako slowly laid the child to rest. One of the injured villagers noticed that her clothes were covered in blood and offered to bring something to clean her off. Hinako quietly declined. There was still work to do. Stepping outside, she looked down at the blood staining her hands. She admitted that she truly was a terrible person, not only a murderer. Now she had become a liar as well. The hero immediately disagreed. Before he could say anything else, the village chief came running toward them, completely out of breath. Another emergency had arrived. The previous attack wasn't the end. A second monster wave was already approaching. If those monsters broke through the village walls, there would finally be real casualties. The hero's expression instantly hardened. He pointed toward the injured people inside the shelter. Weren't they already casualties? Did their suffering somehow not count? The village chief struggled to answer. That only made the hero angrier. He couldn't believe anyone would treat wounded people like they didn't matter. Finally, the chief snapped back. What could an otherworlder possibly understand? People didn't simply wander into a remote village like this by accident. The drifters living there were murderers, bandits, and fugitives escaping the law. The village had already done more than enough by giving them shelter. Now, during a crisis, the hero was defending criminals instead of innocent villagers. Before the argument could continue, Alice called for Hinako. Ignoring both men entirely, Hinako focused only on the incoming horde. They had to stop the second wave before it reached the village. The hero stood speechless. Meanwhile, hope returned to the village chief's face. He hurried over, grabbed Hinako's hand, and thanked her from the bottom of his heart. Just as he expected, when disaster struck, real adventurers could always be relied upon. Hinako calmly corrected him. She wasn't doing it out of kindness. She was simply fulfilling the job she had been hired to do. At that moment, Alice climbed down and called to Hinako. She really needed to wipe her hand clean. Hinako assumed she meant the blood and replied that it didn't bother her. But Alice shook her head. She wasn't talking about the blood. She was talking about the filth that had just touched Hinako's hand. The village chief froze. So did the hero. Even Hinako could only give a quiet, exhausted response. Alice casually placed a pack of wipes beside her. Hinako apologized on her friend's behalf. Alice simply had a habit of saying exactly what she thought. The chief remained completely speechless. Without wasting another moment, Hinako turned back toward the battlefield. If they let the monster horde break through, the injured villagers would never have time to escape. And most importantly, that little boy was on his way to heaven. He deserved a peaceful farewell. The massive horde charged forward. Hinako gave a single order. Every monster standing in their way was to be eliminated. Alice raised her enormous shovel. Then the slaughter began. One swing after another crushed the advancing monsters until not a single one remained standing. When the dust finally settled, every monster had been wiped out by Alice, Hinako, and the hero. With the battle over, Hinako thanked the hero for fighting alongside them. He paused before asking one final question. If she truly believed she was a murderer, if she really thought she was a liar, wouldn't it have been far easier to abandon that dying child and walk away instead of risking her own life to protect the village? Hinako quietly answered that she had only fulfilled the job she had accepted. Nothing more. The hero couldn't take his eyes off her. After a long silence, Hinako admitted there was one more reason. As an older sister, she wanted to live in a way that her little sister would never be ashamed of. That, too, was part of her responsibility. As she prepared to leave, the hero stopped her once more. What would happen if she ever found her own sister? After everything that had happened, would she really seek revenge again? Hinako honestly admitted that she didn't know. If her sister apologized, would she kill her? Or would she be the one who died instead? She had no answer. But one thing was certain. They had to meet again. Only by facing each other could they finally settle everything before God. Otherwise, neither of them would ever find peace. Not Hinako. And not her older sister either. She quietly walked away, leaving the hero watching her back with a heavy heart. As the two companions left the village, both Hinako and Alice remained silent. Finally, Hinako questioned herself. She had killed her own sister. She had lied to a dying child in his final moments. How could someone like her claim to be setting an example that her little sister would be proud of? Alice gave her simple, honest answer. As a giant, she never fully understood the human idea of right and wrong. Among giants, defeating someone who stained your honor was considered something worthy of pride. And as for that little boy, he was able to meet his mother before the end. A memory suddenly resurfaced in Alice's mind. Voices from her past mocked her without mercy. She was called a complete fool, a useless worm, someone so small that she could be crushed underfoot. With a heavy pile of rocks strapped to her back, Alice struggled to keep walking. She reminded them that they were all family, but that was exactly why they forced her to work. If she wanted to stay with them, she had to make herself useful, obey without question, and never bring shame upon her clan. As the others walked away, Alice desperately begged them not to leave her behind. She simply couldn't keep up. The memory shifted. A cheerful little girl wandered over and curiously asked what Alice was doing. Alice explained that she was hanging the laundry. Carefully, she stretched the clothes across a long wooden pole. The little girl watched with sparkling eyes, completely fascinated by the simple task. Nearby, Hinako was peacefully asleep. Alice quietly motioned for the girl to stay silent. The little girl immediately covered her mouth and smiled. Alice whispered that they would wait for the clothes to dry while her sister rested. Instead, the little girl suddenly raised her hand. A small flame appeared. Alice blinked in surprise. The girl proudly explained that the fire should dry the laundry much faster. Curious, Alice asked if she could really use magic. The girl nodded excitedly. Her mother had always told her she possessed a special gift. She rolled up her sleeve and proudly revealed the magical markings running along her arm. She explained that the larger the imprint, the stronger a person's magical talent. Alice praised her, mentioning that only about 1 person in 100 could even use magic at all. The little girl smiled even wider. Most people only had magical markings on their hands. Her markings stretched all the way to her elbow. Not only that, she could use both fire and water magic. Her teacher had even told her that one day she might hear the voices of the magic spirits themselves. Everyone said she was special. Alice asked what she wanted to become in the future. Without hesitation, the girl declared that she would become the greatest sorcerer ever. She had so many brothers and sisters depending on her. If she became strong enough, she could make life easier for every single one of them. Alice couldn't help smiling. She praised the girl's determination. Then she gently reminded her of one thing. No matter what happened, she should always treasure her family. The flashback came to an end. Later, Hinako and Alice returned to the Adventurers Guild. After hearing their report, the guild master realized they were preparing to leave town. Hinako confirmed it. They had earned enough money and gathered all the information they could. There was only one problem left: the church. The guild master immediately understood. Hinako explained that she wasn't trying to make enemies, but based on everything she had learned, the church would almost certainly come after them. Several adventurers nearby joined the conversation. Sarah warned that the church never let insults to its reputation go unanswered. If they believed their honor had been tarnished, revenge was inevitable. Blitz added another worrying detail. The church was supposedly testing strange ancient weapons. Sarah sighed in frustration. The church held enormous power across the human kingdoms. On top of that, they were notorious human supremacists who constantly caused trouble for anyone they looked down on. When Alice heard the words ancient weapons, she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a strange cross-shaped object. Then she casually asked if this was the kind of weapon they meant. The guild master immediately recognized it. It was the very same weapon carried by the Apostle Knight. He quickly asked why she still had it. Alice answered as if it were completely ordinary. The cross had only gotten in the way while they were burying the Apostle Knight's body. She figured they might as well sell it afterward. Sarah and Blitz nearly shouted in disbelief. Sell it? The guild master immediately refused. There was no chance he would buy something that could bring the church's wrath down on his guild. Alice looked at the cross with a puzzled expression. For something supposedly considered an ancient weapon, she couldn't sense even the slightest trace of magic. To her, it was nothing more than a stick. Curious, she casually pressed part of the cross. The object suddenly unfolded. Hidden mechanisms slid into place as glowing circles appeared across its surface. Alice stared in surprise. Then, without warning, the weapon fired. A blazing projectile shot straight into the sky. Everyone inside the guild froze. Watching the signal disappear into the heavens, Hinako quietly realized one thing. Their troubles were only just beginning. Blitz was left stunned by the overwhelming power. It was a good thing that attack had never been used against him. Hinako teased that he was right, since he had settled for a much weaker weapon when they fought instead. She then turned to everyone inside the guild. With heartfelt gratitude, she thanked them for taking such good care of the two sisters during their stay. As her way of giving back, she announced that everyone was free to enjoy the celebration because every single expense would be covered by the sisters. The entire guild erupted in cheers. She even asked the guild master to include the repair costs, and the request was gladly accepted since it solved a huge problem. But the celebration didn't erase the danger ahead. Alice reminded Hinako that the church's remaining apostles would definitely come after her. Even Blitz wondered if she could really handle what was coming. Hinako admitted that she probably couldn't survive alone. Thankfully, she wasn't alone anymore. Standing beside her was her precious little sister, the one she treasured more than anything. She smiled warmly at Alice. The words hit Alice harder than any attack ever could. She completely broke down. Her sobs echoed through the entire guild as guilt poured out all at once. She blamed herself for being foolish enough to get kidnapped, for dragging Hinako into even more danger, and for still being treated like someone dependable despite all of it. The adventurers could only laugh at the familiar sight. The guild's biggest crybaby was at it again. Even the tiny giant sister couldn't stop bawling. Hinako gently caught every tear that rolled down Alice's face. Then she apologized instead. She admitted she couldn't do anything by herself. She was always the one relying on Alice. She couldn't even wipe away her little sister's tears on her own, making her feel like the truly worthless sister. Those words shattered Alice's heart. She cried even harder. There was no way Hinako could ever be worthless. She had accepted someone like her as family when nobody else ever did. From that moment on, Alice made herself a promise. She would become stronger. She would prove that she deserved to stand beside Hinako. And she would never allow herself to become a burden again. Then she made one final vow. Anyone who dared lay a hand on Hinako would be torn apart without mercy. Hinako simply smiled. Meanwhile, Alice couldn't stop crying. That emotional moment brought back memories she had tried to bury. Back then, Alice always wore a smile. Even while struggling under an enormous load, her own kin merely watched without lifting a finger. By the time she finally arrived, everyone had already finished eating. Instead of saving her a meal, they ordered her to clean up the camp because it was already time to leave. When she asked about her share of the food, they pointed at what was supposedly left for her. There was nothing. Still, Alice simply sat down and smiled. The memories only became more painful. During one trade, Alice noticed something was wrong. The amount they were being paid didn't match the agreement. Surrounded by giants, she calmly pointed out the mistake. They had delivered the same amount of iron as before, yet the payment should have doubled according to the written price. The merchants froze. They had never expected a giant to be able to read. Alice even pointed directly at the price list, suggesting they had simply miscounted. Instead of admitting the truth, the merchants immediately made excuses. They twisted the situation around, accusing Alice of slandering them with false accusations. Then they threatened to cancel all future trades, claiming they had gone out of their way to do business with the giants only to receive such disrespect. The giants believed every word. Instead of questioning the merchants, they turned their anger toward Alice. Once again, she stood there completely alone. Eventually, Alice was left lying on the ground, beaten and bleeding. She couldn't understand why everything always ended this way. She was smaller than every other giant. She was weaker. Even her unusual hair made her look different from everyone else. Whenever she tried solving problems with her intelligence instead of brute strength, they only mocked her for not acting like a real giant. Tears began to well up in her eyes. But she forced them back. Giants weren't supposed to cry. At the very least, she could still do that much. She couldn't bring any more shame to her family. So even as tears filled her eyes, she forced herself to keep smiling. Alice took a bite of the cotton candy, and her face instantly lit up. It was unbelievably sweet. The vendor couldn't help but smile. Seeing that reaction alone made all the extra effort worthwhile. Hinako thanked him for going through so much trouble. Alice found it unusual that Hinako had bought sweets in the first place. Hinako admitted she had noticed Alice staring at them before. Since they were about to leave town, she wanted the two of them to try one together. Alice smiled. Then reality hit. Making one that huge couldn't have been cheap. The vendor scratched his head, admitting he had gotten so caught up making it that he completely forgot to calculate the price. Hinako quickly estimated that if a normal one cost a single copper coin, then one 100 times bigger should cost around 100. But Alice immediately corrected the math. The true cost wasn't based on size alone. Most of the expense came from the amount of sugar used. After judging the measuring cups and estimating the ingredients, she calculated the fair price at around 260 copper coins, even before adding the extra labor. The vendor was left speechless. She had figured out his entire process just by watching. Alice shyly admitted that paying attention to little details had simply become a habit. She even apologized in case her calculations were wrong. Then she apologized to Hinako as well, worried that she had made her spend even more money. But Hinako smiled. Instead of overpaying, Alice had saved her from paying an unfair price. The vendor could only laugh in amazement. Alice truly had a brain as impressive as everything else about her. Hinako proudly agreed. As far as she was concerned, Alice was far smarter than she would ever be. The compliment immediately brought tears back to Alice's eyes. Afterward, the sisters continued shopping around town, picking up clothes and other necessities while Alice helped compare prices and choose what they needed. The townspeople watched the two sisters with warm smiles. For the first time, Alice looked genuinely happy. As they walked back, Alice noticed just how many bags they were carrying. Hinako explained that the reward for defeating the ice dragon had been generous enough that money wouldn't be a problem for quite a while. But despite saying that, she suddenly looked troubled. Alice noticed right away. She reminded Hinako that she was always the one risking her life in battle. She was the strong one, the dependable one. Even now, she was carrying all of their belongings herself. Hinako couldn't help wondering if she actually did anything for Alice at all. As a big sister, she only wished she could be someone Alice could be proud of. Instead, it felt like Alice never needed anything from her. The thought alone brought tears to her eyes. Alice immediately stopped her. Hinako had already given her everything she could ever ask for. As she gently wiped away Hinako's tears, she started crying herself. Hinako quickly apologized. She promised she would never say anything like that again. Even after calming down, Alice couldn't stop sniffling. Then she pointed straight at Hinako and handed down her punishment. She had to go buy herself a new set of clothes. Hinako tried to brush it off. She didn't mind wearing the same outfit a little longer. Alice wasn't having it. That uniform had already been worn down to threads. Wasn't that the entire reason they had spent the day shopping? Hinako still hesitated. She couldn't see the point of visiting such an expensive clothing store. But Alice had already thought that through. Since Hinako came from another world, she didn't fully understand how dangerous everyday life could be for someone like her. Even something as simple as getting measured for new clothes could become risky without protection. A high-end tailor employed proper security. It was the safest place in town. And on top of that, they had the finest craftsmen available. Hinako finally gave in. Alice had won. She agreed to have a new uniform tailored. Alice made sure to remind her to order several spare outfits as well. And if anything happened inside, she was to ring the emergency bell immediately. Hinako smiled and agreed. Then she couldn't help teasing her little sister. Despite being younger, Alice certainly loved acting like the older one. With a smile, Hinako stepped inside the tailor's shop, completely unaware that the peaceful day was about to take another unexpected turn. A group of men quietly surrounded the rooftops. Without even turning around, Alice called them out. She figured it was about time they stopped hiding. The men froze for a moment. Then one of them stepped forward. It was Philip, one of the church's apostle knights. He admitted he was impressed. For a giant, Alice had incredibly sharp instincts. Alice brushed it off. Staying alert had become second nature whenever she was with Hinako. Philip nodded. After all, the pair standing before him had already defeated one of his fellow apostle knights. One was an otherworlder, the other was a giant. Alice simply laughed. The way they were standing around trying to look intimidating didn't impress her at all. She reminded Philip exactly what his fellow apostle had done. Nathaniel had ambushed Hinako in the middle of the night. He had tried to assault her, then planned to sell her like merchandise. Philip clicked his tongue in disgust. Once again, Nathaniel's disgusting habits had caused trouble. He admitted that his fellow apostle had disgraced both himself and the Holy Church. Alice watched him carefully. Philip continued without the slightest hint of shame. Nathaniel's greatest mistake wasn't the crime itself. It was allowing witnesses to survive. His actions had the potential to shake the people's faith in the church. Even worse, he had lowered himself by fighting filthy savages like giants and otherworlders. And somehow, he had actually lost. Alice's eyes widened. Then Philip calmly declared what needed to be done. This time, they would correct Nathaniel's mistake. They would ambush the sisters, assault them, and sell them off themselves. As those horrifying words echoed through the street, Philip's body suddenly began to transform. Strange ancient weapons fused into his body, covering him with mysterious magical markings. Even Alice couldn't understand what she was looking at. Philip proudly introduced himself as the 5th of the 12 apostles, a man who had earned the title High Wizard. He explained that only 1 in 100 people could become a sorcerer. Only 1 in 1,000 would ever reach the rank of wizard, and only 1 in 10,000 could become a high wizard. But his true power came from the ancient weapons wrapped around his body. They amplified his magical energy to monstrous levels. Then he turned his gaze toward Alice. As a giant, she should understand better than anyone. True strength belonged to those who stood above everyone else. Alice stared silently at his transformed body. The magical cross, the strange weapons, they reminded her of everything that had happened before. Her eyes instinctively searched for Hinako. Philip raised his voice. Everything in this world was meant to be ruled by those standing above. Humanity, the church, magic itself. Compared to that overwhelming power, even a giant was nothing more than an ant. He ordered Alice to disappear from this world. Together with the little girl she called her sister, Alice didn't move. Instead, another painful memory resurfaced. Long ago, her own kin had called her over to admire the view from a towering cliff. Alice admitted that the height frightened her and innocently asked what they wanted. Without warning, they shoved her straight off the edge. Confusion filled her face as she fell. Even then, she forced herself to smile. The last thing she heard was a cold farewell, not to blame her own family. Her tiny body crashed deep into the forest below. Broken, she finally began to cry. Yet even through the pain, she tried to laugh. At least she was still alive. She couldn't understand why they had done it. Was it because she was useless? A painful memory snapped something inside Alice. The emotions she had buried for years finally erupted. At that moment, she awakened the power of the Jinn. A violent surge of mana exploded around her as her body began to transform. She slowly rose into the sky. Even Philip's confidence vanished. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Spirit magic. One after another, the elemental spirits gathered around Alice. The surrounding mana grew denser by the second. Philip could barely hide the panic in his voice. The magical power overflowing from her was beyond anything he had ever experienced. Just what was she? The answer was simple. Alice was a giant, but her class was wizard giant. Philip refused to believe it. A giant's massive body was already overflowing with magical imprints. Combined with power on this level, it was almost as if she stood above every mage in existence. Almost like the true ruler of all magic. The overwhelming aura vanished just as quickly as it had appeared. Alice slowly sat down, clearly exhausted from the transformation. At that moment, Hinako finally stepped outside. She immediately called out to Alice. Alice turned toward her, relieved to see her safe. Hinako apologized for making her wait so long, but Alice didn't mind in the slightest. Instead, her eyes lit up. The new clothes suited Hinako perfectly. Hinako looked down at herself in confusion. As far as she could tell, it was still the same old uniform, but Alice couldn't agree. Somehow, Hinako looked even more charming than before. She even framed the scene with her fingers like an imaginary camera, insisting that Hinako's cuteness couldn't possibly be measured. Hinako could only sigh. Alice always got carried away. Alice simply laughed. The peaceful moment didn't last long. Hinako suddenly noticed ashes drifting through the air. Then came the unmistakable smell of burning meat. Alice guessed that someone nearby was probably roasting an enormous beast. Hinako gave her a helpless look. After all that praise, now they were about to get covered in ash. Without hesitation, Alice spread her mantle over Hinako. She told her big sister to take cover underneath it. Hinako thanked her, but hesitated. She didn't want to dirty Alice's cloak. Alice simply smiled. Anything filthy that tried to reach Hinako was her responsibility to stop. That was the duty of a little sister. In the middle of the forest, Alice asked Hinako if she could borrow the map for a moment. Hinako wondered what was wrong and insisted she could still handle navigation. But Alice pointed out that they had already passed the exact same tree 3 times. Hinako begged for just a little more time, convinced she was finally starting to understand the map. Unfortunately, Alice quickly realized that Hinako couldn't read it in the first place. And at that rate, they were getting absolutely nowhere. The moment Alice took the map, everything made sense. After checking their position, she figured out that the world tree was just a little farther east. As they continued walking, Hinako couldn't stop staring at the massive world tree towering over the horizon. No matter how many times she looked at it, its size was still unbelievable. Then her curiosity shifted underground, leaving her wondering what existed around its enormous roots. Alice looked completely confused. She couldn't believe she had never explained it before. At the base of the World Tree lay the homeland of the demons, along with the Demon Lord's castle itself. The land beneath its shadow was the most fiercely contested territory in the world, where humans and demons had fought countless wars for control. Hinako froze for a second. Only then did she realize they were actually heading toward the Demon Lord's castle. Alice couldn't help thinking that question came a little too late. She even wondered if Hinako truly understood what a Demon Lord was. Hinako confidently nodded anyway. In her mind, the title could only belong to Schubert. Alice simply stared at her in silence. Before she could respond, strange laughter echoed through the forest. Elsewhere, a group of adventurers found themselves facing a horrifying monster. One after another, they were sent flying before they could even react. Just moments earlier, they thought they had struck lucky. Now they were fighting for their lives. Panic spread through the group. One adventurer completely froze in fear. The monster immediately bit off his head. His companions watched his lifeless body collapse as the creature slowly turned its attention toward them. Everyone was terrified. Everyone except the little girl standing nearby, who seemed completely unaware of the danger. One desperate adventurer reached toward her, trying to pull her away before the monster attacked. But the creature was already closing in. He had no idea what to do. Just as its massive jaws came crashing down, a bell rang through the forest. At the very last second, Alice burst into the fight. She slammed her weapon straight into the monster's mouth, stopping the attack cold. The stunned adventurers could only watch as she launched a relentless assault. Without giving the creature a chance to recover, she chained together Gnome, Druid, and Extend, crushing its throat before finishing it off completely. The battle ended almost as quickly as it began. It was a man-eater, a monster that was rarely seen anywhere near that area. The surviving adventurers and the little girl remained completely frozen. Then Alice looked their way. Instead of relief, they looked terrified of her. Hinako finally caught up from behind and immediately checked if anyone had been injured. After everything settled down, everyone gathered around a campfire while Alice prepared a meal. One of the adventurers thanked both women for saving their lives. Their group had simply been escorting the little girl home when the man-eaters suddenly ambushed them. The child quietly confirmed the story. Hinako listened sympathetically, realizing just how close they had come to dying. Meanwhile, Alice finished cooking and casually suggested roasting the monster. The adventurer couldn't believe what he was hearing. If it was called a man-eater, wasn't eating one just as dangerous? Alice calmly explained that people already ate vegetables grown with manure made from dung, even knowing insects laid eggs in the soil. Compared to that, this wasn't much different. She had already removed the monster's organs and burned them, making the meat perfectly safe to eat. Then she revealed something even more surprising. Man-eaters were mass-produced during the Great Human-Demon War. They earned their name because they fought alongside the demons, not because humans couldn't eat them, which made one question impossible to ignore. These monsters were only supposed to exist deep inside demon territory. So what was one doing all the way out there? Hinako gently comforted the grieving adventurer, reminding him that a monster, not Alice, had taken his friend's life. She understood how painful it was to witness something like that. But for her and Alice, food was a matter of survival. Alice admitted that Hinako constantly gave her trouble. Hinako smiled and pointed out that the feeling went both ways. The little girl quietly watched the sisters interact. One adventurer couldn't help commenting that, from the way they acted, it almost looked like they had the big sister and little sister roles completely backwards. His companion immediately warned him to stay quiet. Both Hinako and Alice turned toward them. The little girl suddenly spoke up. She asked Hinako if it wasn't difficult being so powerless while still carrying the responsibility of being the older sister. Everyone fell silent. Alice was about to step in, but Hinako gently stopped her. The little girl continued asking questions. If Hinako was really the older sister, was she stronger than Alice? Not at all. Every battle was fought by Alice. Then maybe she was smarter. But Alice had taught her more things than she could ever count. Perhaps she was a better leader. Once again, the answer was no. Just moments earlier, Alice had been scolding her for getting lost because she couldn't even read a map. The little girl hesitated. Then she asked the one question no one expected. If none of those things were true, how could she possibly be the older sister? Hinako paused before answering. She admitted she knew better than anyone how incompetent she could be. Every single day reminded her of her own shortcomings. But she refused to believe that a person's worth was measured only by strength, intelligence, or talent. She wasn't Alice's older sister because she was better. She was the older sister because she wanted to be there for her little sister. No matter how limited she was, she would always do everything she could for Alice. The little girl quietly lowered her head. A little later, she sat alone beside the campfire while Hinako mentioned that Alice had found a nearby river to bathe in. She warmly invited the girl to come along. The little girl clearly wanted to go. But one of the adventurers shot her a threatening glare. Immediately, she declined the invitation. Soon, Hinako and Ellis headed toward the river, leaving the girl alone with the adventurers. As the camp grew quiet, Hinako's words echoed in her mind, to do the best she could. Meanwhile, the adventurers began whispering among themselves. Before those two women returned, they planned to prepare a little surprise. If they captured the older sister as a hostage, dealing with the giant would become easy. Even better, Hinako was an otherworld. To them, it felt like they had just hit the jackpot. The little girl overheard every word. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She confronted them, asking if they truly intended to kidnap not only her, but also the very people who had just saved their lives. One of the men slowly walked over and grabbed her by the chin. He coldly admitted that what they were doing was cruel. But from his perspective, seeing a pampered little noble girl and an otherworlder traveling with a giant was simply too tempting to ignore. To him, it looked like fortune had finally smiled his way. The terrified girl began trembling as tears filled her eyes. The man immediately ordered her to stay quiet. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed through the forest. He remembered that the sisters had gone to bathe, but they had returned far sooner than expected. Thinking it was Hinako and Ellis, he turned around. Instead, a pack of man-eaters emerged from the darkness. Before anyone could react, one of the monsters tore through his companion. In an instant, only the terrified man and the helpless little girl were left alive. Deep in the forest, the sisters finally reached a quiet river. Ellis used salamander magic to warm the water, carefully adjusting the temperature until it felt just right. Once she finished, she proudly told Hinako it was ready. Hinako smiled and thanked her, just like always. The two finally settled into the bath and relaxed in the soothing water. Then, without warning, Hinako suddenly disappeared beneath the surface. Ellis immediately panicked and rushed to apologize. A moment later, Hinako emerged, reassuring her that everything was fine. She had only gone underwater for a second. The two leaned back against the rocks, enjoying the peaceful moment. Hinako looked around at the handmade bath. She pointed out that she had been the one who dug it out and laid all the stones herself. Even so, she had to admit, a proper bath really was amazing. Ellis explained that giants rarely bathe, but thanks to her magic, creating an outdoor hot spring like this was incredibly easy. If Hinako had never taught her about bathing, she probably never would have discovered how wonderful it felt. Hinako smiled. Hearing that made her realize she had been worrying far too much. Ellis agreed. As far as she was concerned, those humans simply didn't understand the bond the two sisters shared. The next time someone questioned their relationship, she joked that she'd just eat them instead. Hinako laughed at the terrifying image. Then a thought suddenly crossed her mind. Did giants actually eat humans? Ellis looked puzzled. To giants, humans looked far too similar to themselves, so the idea of eating one sounded disgusting. Although, she had heard an ancient story about a desperate clan preserving pickled humans during a terrible famine. Hinako awkwardly wondered if she could stomach one if another giant clan offered it as a gesture of hospitality. Even Ellis looked horrified. She immediately decided that would be an easy refusal. Before the conversation could continue, a desperate cry for help echoed through the forest. The sisters instantly turned toward the sound. Charging through the trees was the little girl from earlier. Behind her ran the surviving adventurer. And chasing both of them was an entire swarm of man-eaters. The moment Ellis saw the horde, she realized the situation had become far more dangerous. She immediately called out to Hinako, ordering her to provide cover. Without wasting another second, Ellis drew her weapon and activated Jin magic. The monsters closed in. Just before the little girl was swallowed whole, Hinako rushed forward and pulled her to safety. The unlucky adventurer wasn't as fortunate. He disappeared into the jaws of the man-eaters. Hinako crashed hard onto the ground, scraping herself in the process. The surviving monsters immediately turned their attention toward the sisters. Just as they prepared to attack, Ellis called out, then unleashed Undine. One blast after another tore through the swarm. Explosions echoed across the forest as each man-eater was wiped out in rapid succession. The little girl stood frozen in fear, unable to look away. Hinako gently turned toward her and told her to step back. No matter what happened next, she promised the frightened child that everything would be all right. The remaining man-eaters wrapped their tentacles around Ellis, pinning her in place. Unable to break free, she was completely restrained. Hinako reacted instantly. She pulled the string attached to the bell on her head and began ringing it over and over, spinning it to make the sound echo throughout the forest. Ellis called out to her. The monsters immediately turned toward the ringing bell. The little girl suddenly recognized it. It was a beast-calling bell. Hinako kept ringing it, successfully pulling the monsters' attention away and forcing them to loosen their grip on Ellis. The little girl couldn't believe what she was seeing. Hinako was deliberately making herself the target. She desperately shouted for her to stop, but it was already too late. The moment the monsters were distracted, Ellis activated Gnome and crushed their tentacles beneath a powerful stomp. There was no way she was letting them keep hold of her. The little girl watched in complete disbelief. Hinako was risking her own life, just to protect a giant. Her mind replayed everything Hinako had told her earlier. She wasn't stronger. She wasn't smarter. She wasn't a better leader. She admitted she wasn't exceptional at anything. So how could someone like that throw herself into danger without hesitation? Hinako continued ringing the bell. Just then, two man-eaters lunged straight toward her. Before they could reach her, Alice crashed into them with a devastating kick. Tears welled up in her eyes as pure rage took over. There was no chance she would let anyone lay a finger on her beloved older sister. She lowered her weapon and called upon every bit of magical power she could gather. This time, she unleashed Undine alongside Gao. The river itself twisted into the shape of a massive serpent before surging across the battlefield. The torrent swallowed the man-eaters one after another, wiping out the entire swarm. The little girl could only stand there, frozen in fear. After changing back into their clothes, Hinako immediately checked on her. She gently asked if she was hurt. Then asked again, just to make sure. The little girl's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't understand it. Why would someone with no strength willingly risk her own life? Hinako simply smiled. She explained that she did it because it was the only thing she could do. Besides, she was the older sister. If putting her life on the line meant protecting her little sister, wasn't that exactly what an older sister was supposed to do? Hinako reached out her hand. The little girls stared at it in silence. Then Hinako's words finally clicked, doing everything she could, for the sake of her little sister. It made perfect sense. The girls slowly accepted her hand. With a bright smile, she thanked Hinako. Then, almost naturally, she called her Weni. Both Hinako and Alice froze. Alice especially looked completely stunned. A wave of panic instantly washed over her. Later that night, the three rested beside another campfire deep in the forest. Alice slept on a tree branch above them. Even in her dreams, she mumbled possessively, insisting that her Weni belonged to her alone. Meanwhile, Hinako slept soundly beneath the tree. Tightly, the little girl slipped away into the forest. The surviving man-eaters emerged from the darkness and gathered around her. She calmly assured them that everything was fine now. Those two women were not their enemies. She admitted she hadn't forgotten her mission, but after meeting Hinako, she couldn't resist. Hinako had no special power, yet she was someone she genuinely admired. As the little girl rested against the monsters, one thought filled her mind. If she could call Hinako her older sister, maybe someday, she could truly become her little sister as well. As they prepared to leave, Carla asked Hinako where they were heading next. Hinako explained that they were still on their way to the capital, but there was one place she wanted to visit first. She then admitted that she was flattered, but being addressed that way still felt a little embarrassing. Carla immediately apologized before calling her big sister once again, and that alone was enough to make Alice visibly irritated. The two simply smiled at each other. Carla then admitted she was jealous of Alice. She had heard that giants called one another kin and lived together in clans, almost like enormous families. Looking at Hinako, she wondered if someone accepted as the representative of a giant clan could welcome new brothers and sisters regardless of race. Alice shot her a sharp glare. Hinako simply nodded, believing that was true. And that was exactly why they had come here. Soon, the bustling settlement came into view. Hinako explained that this was the village of giants, where Aoto-sama and the rest of their kin lived. It was the heart of the Cornet clan. Carla looked around in amazement. A permanent village of giants was something she had never imagined. Until now, she had only known giants as wandering nomads. She glanced toward Alice, hoping for an answer. Instead, she got complete silence. The villagers soon noticed the newcomers. Several giants immediately recognized Hinako. Within moments, someone shouted that their big sister had returned. The entire village rushed toward her. One giant stepped forward with an enormous grin, welcoming the smallest giant home after such a long absence. Hinako happily greeted him in return. This cheerful giant was Sonin Cornet de Zuba, the liveliest giant in the entire clan. Without warning, Sonin scooped Hinako up into his massive hand. He excitedly asked if she had come to see their father and proudly declared that he would take her there himself. Carla froze in fear. Alice instantly stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. She demanded that Sonin put Hinako down. In the hands of a giant, even the smallest mistake could seriously injure someone her size. Sonin looked over at Alice before casually greeting her, clearly recognizing the whitest giant. He jokingly wondered if she truly believed he would accidentally hurt his own kin. Pretending to feel offended, he claimed his feelings were deeply hurt. Then, to prove his point, or rather, to tease her even more, he slowly clenched his giant hand around Hinako. The playful grin on his face only made things worse. Alice immediately reached for her weapon. Her expression turned frighteningly dark. Meanwhile, Hinako simply burst into laughter. She explained that Sonin had always loved taking his jokes way too far. Apologizing for her little sister's behavior, she politely asked him to let her go already. Sonin laughed it off and quickly released her. He admitted he simply couldn't resist teasing the newest member of their family. Turning back toward Ellis, he apologized for pushing the joke too far. Ellis answered with nothing but a cold stare. Hinako then told Ellis that she was going to meet Auto-sama. She asked her to wait outside with Carla for a little while. Ellis quietly agreed. With that, Hinako entered the village temple. Inside, Auto warmly welcomed her home after such a long absence. She happily greeted her daughter, the smallest giant. Hinako respectfully apologized for staying away for so long before greeting the wisest giant once again. Outside, life in the village continued as usual. The giants remained busy with their daily routines, although many of them occasionally glanced toward Ellis, who sat silently on the ground beside Carla. Unable to ignore the awkward silence, Carla finally asked why Ellis wasn't talking to the other giants. Ellis didn't even acknowledge the question. Carla let out an awkward laugh before becoming serious. She cautiously wondered if Ellis actually disliked other giants, despite being one herself. For a brief moment, Ellis remained completely still. Then she finally spoke. She confirmed that the girl's name was Carla. After that, she bluntly pointed out that Carla had absolutely no tact. Even though she spoke politely, every question she asked was unbelievably intrusive. Ellis couldn't help wondering what kind of upbringing could produce someone so bold. Carla immediately became flustered. She nervously insisted that she had been raised completely normally. She almost slipped and mentioned growing up in a castle before quickly correcting herself and claiming she meant her home instead. She desperately maintained that she had lived a perfectly normal life. But that tiny mistake had already planted another question, making the conversation even more interesting. Ellis let out a quiet scoff before finally answering. She explained that giants were once known as a brave, proud, and deeply righteous race, but that was nothing more than ancient history, a fairy tale from the era of the war against the gods. For generations, giants had lived as pillagers. Their overwhelming strength left them with no natural enemies, so they never bothered building cities or cultivating land. Instead, they swept across the world, consuming everything in their path like a swarm of locusts. They looked down on every other race as inferior while never recognizing the ugliness of their own nature. Carla glanced around the village in confusion. The giants living here didn't seem anything like that. From what she could see, they all had honest work within human territory. Ellis explained that the mining quarry only existed because of Hinako. After being accepted into the clan as a giant herself, Hinako negotiated with nearby nobles and established a legitimate way for the giants to sell their labor. It gave the clan a legal livelihood. When Hinako joined, she was given the title of the smallest giant. To outsiders, it sounded harmless. But among giants, the word small was meant as an insult. Ellis then revealed that her own title came from the same tradition. She was known as the whitest giant. Among giants, the word white carried the same weight as a taboo. Carla couldn't believe it. When she thought of the words white and giant together, only one image came to mind. She abruptly stopped herself before finishing the thought. Instead, she shifted the conversation. Considering how incredible Ellis's magic was, she couldn't understand why the other giants treated her that way. Ellis explained that, to giants, raw physical strength was everything. Even relying on a bow or a javelin was enough to earn the label of a coward. Magic was viewed even more harshly. In the end, she believed the truth was simple. Those giants didn't truly care about either of them. They didn't even see Hinako or herself as real members of the family. Before the silence could settle, a familiar voice interrupted. Sonin had overheard everything. He complained that he couldn't let those words slide. Ellis was trying awfully hard to hurt his feelings. Meanwhile, inside the temple, Auto continued listening to Hinako. He asked whether she truly wished to accept another person as kin. After giving it some thought, he admitted that a larger clan only brought greater strength. Then he wondered why she had felt the need to ask permission in the first place. Hinako explained that she and Ellis had already exchanged pledge cups. Since her branch of the Cornet clan, the Kayagoko branch, intended to welcome a new member, she feared doing so without approval might cause unnecessary concern for her older brother and the rest of the main family. She emphasized that her only wish was to give Ellis something she had never truly had before. A home. A place where she belonged. There were no hidden motives beyond that. Auto smiled warmly. He assured her that there was no reason to worry about such things. She should simply welcome her new kin with confidence. Hinako thanked him. She admitted she had probably been too full of herself to think someone like her could cause any concern for the main branch. Auto immediately reassured her otherwise. Respecting old traditions was a great virtue. Seeing a daughter who understood and honored those customs filled him with pride. Just like the day they had exchanged their own pledge cups, Carla suddenly jumped in surprise. She couldn't understand why Sonin and Ellis had started fighting. Sonin simply laughed. Although Ellis looked genuinely offended, he casually told Carla not to worry. This was just how giants communicated with one another. He then asked Ellis if she still remembered the day everyone exchanged pledge cups to officially become family. After sharing a drink with their father, it had been Hinako's turn. For a giant, the ritual required nothing more than a single gulp, just one drink. But for a human, that cup was practically large enough to swim in. Ellis's expression immediately darkened. The memory was clearly not a pleasant one. The story shifted back to that day. Everyone had explained that it was only a formality. Hinako only needed to take a small sip. Instead, she kept drinking, and drinking, and drinking. What should have taken seconds stretched into an entire week. By the end, Hinako looked ready to throw up. Ellis finally stepped in and told her to stop. There was no need to finish the entire cup. Sonin burst into laughter. He agreed that she had already done more than enough. The little lady could finally call it quits. But that unforgettable misunderstanding had become one of the clan's favorite memories, and it perfectly captured the kind of person Hinako truly was. Ellis's eyes slowly filled with tears as the memory continued. Back then, Hinako had stubbornly kept drinking from the enormous pledge cup. Every giant watched in complete disbelief. Eventually, Hinako knelt before everyone and apologized. She felt ashamed because she had spilled some of the drink from the cup that symbolized the bond between parent and child. Sonin could only stare at her in silence. He had been completely dumbfounded. Hinako explained that, by exchanging a pledge cup with a human like her, Sonin and the rest of the clan had surely faced ridicule from both inside and outside the giant community. Once she realized that she wanted to honor their acceptance the only way she knew how, she was genuinely grateful that she had been allowed to become sisters with that girl. But unlike the giants, her life would be short. One day, she would be gone while they continued living. Still kneeling, she made one final request to Auto. After her death, Ellis would inherit the Kayataka clan. When that day came, she begged him to continue protecting Ellis in her place. The memory struck Ellis harder than anything else. She shouted that Hinako was the only family she needed. She didn't need other giants. She didn't need new relatives. Hinako alone was enough. Sonin's playful expression completely disappeared. He grabbed Ellis by the collar and bluntly told her to stop talking such narrow-minded nonsense. Ellis remained silent. Sonin reminded her that the smallest giant had already proven herself to be every bit as great as any giant. He shoved Ellis back. Then he pointed out the painful truth. Hinako was always thinking about everyone else. Meanwhile, Ellis only cared about herself. If she truly wanted to honor her sister, then she needed to grow as well. Not in size, but in heart. The whitest giant still had a long way to go. Back inside the temple, Auto gently called to Hinako. If she truly wished for Ellis to grow, then she also had to continue growing herself. She had to turn away from revenge. She had to let go of her hatred. She had to learn forgiveness. There was no other path forward. For several moments, Hinako said nothing. A gust of wind swept through the temple, extinguishing the fire. Finally, she broke the silence. She quietly asked whether Auto had ever hated someone so deeply that he wished to kill them. Even if that person had once been the one he loved most. Auto paused. Then he admitted that he had. Hinako's expression changed. Her magical spirit slowly emerged around her. She replied that if he truly understood, he should also understand that no matter what happens, you can never truly give up on the person you love. And no matter how deeply they hurt you, it's impossible to truly hate someone your heart still loves. Their conversation eventually came to an end. Hinako returned outside, where Sonin was waiting. He casually asked whether everything had been settled. The moment Hinako saw Ellis, she immediately noticed the bruises on her face. With complete disbelief, she sighed at Sonin. This wasn't the first time. She reminded her older brother that Ellis was still a girl and begged him to stop being so rough. Sonin quickly defended himself, insisting they had only been fooling around. Hinako smiled gently. Then she warned him that if his jokes went too far again, she really would get angry. Sonin immediately accepted the warning. Turning toward Carla, Hinako happily announced that Auto had granted his permission. She was now free to become their newest little sister. Carla's face lit up with excitement. Then she glanced toward Ellis. Hinako explained that the vow of sisterhood represented a bond even stronger than blood. If both sisters accepted it, then from that day forward they would officially become family. Ellis quietly agreed. Carla became overjoyed, convinced she was finally about to become Hinako's little sister. But Hinako immediately corrected her. Carla wouldn't be her little sister. She would become Ellis's little sister instead. The announcement left both girls completely stunned. Hinako cheerfully explained that she had always wanted Ellis to become an older sister herself. This arrangement was perfect. Ellis could barely believe what she had just heard. She quickly told Hinako to slow down. Why exactly was Carla becoming her little sister? Carla looked just as confused. She admitted that she had wanted to become Hinako's little sister, not that giant standing over there. She awkwardly pointed straight at Alice. Hinako simply smiled. She explained that, back in her world, there was something called the elder system. Every older sister guided and protected the younger sister beneath her. Since Hinako was already Alice's older sister, that naturally made Alice Carla's older sister. She even added that she wouldn't mind if Carla called her big sister too. Both Alice and Carla stood there frozen. Neither of them had actually agreed to any of this. Meanwhile, back at the temple, Sonin informed Aoto that Hinako and the others had already departed. He laughed and wondered if her little clan would just keep growing bigger and bigger. The next time they returned, he wanted to throw them a proper welcome party. After all, they were family. Aoto's expression suddenly turned serious. His response immediately caught Sonin off guard. He reminded him that he should already know the truth. Virtue, sacred pledges, the bonds between kin, those ideals had long since faded into the past. Then his gaze drifted into the distance. He quietly added one final warning. The creature they feared was not a giant. Now, only one duty remained. They had to ensure that the ancient calamity never awakened, the legendary white giant god, and the terrifying shadow that followed in its wake. As the group continued through the forest, they spotted a swarm of monsters circling above a nearby town. Alice had been right. The settlement was under attack. A whole flock of wyverns was diving toward a caravan protected by only a handful of adventurers. Hinako immediately asked if they should help. Alice calmly called upon the spirits of druid and gnome. As long as nobody complained when they claimed the monster materials afterward, she had no objections. She grabbed an entire tree with one hand. Using her magic, the massive trunk transformed into a gigantic arrow. Without hesitation, Alice took aim at the sky. Any consequences could wait until later. The giant arrow shot through the air. A direct hit. One of the wyverns was pierced instantly before crashing to the ground. The adventurers below froze in disbelief. None of them had any idea what they had just witnessed. Then someone pointed toward the distant hill. At that size, only a giant could have fired a shot like that. With the attack over, the group joined the caravan on its way to town. Hinako and Carla rode together inside a carriage. A young boy traveling with them couldn't stop thanking Hinako. He admitted they had completely saved his life. Curious, he asked whether Hinako had also been summoned from another world. He confessed that he had genuinely believed he was about to become monster food. Carla quietly leaned toward Hinako and whispered that the boy seemed a little too friendly. The two turned to look at her. The boy introduced himself as Takeru Ishizawa. Hinako politely introduced herself as well. Takeru explained that this was actually his first adventure since arriving in this world. Being transported to another world had sounded amazing at first, but now, he was starting to think he had chosen the wrong cheat ability. Hinako tilted her head in confusion. She had never heard the word spec before. Takeru explained that before coming here, he hadn't really thought about the fact that he would have to die. So he picked an ability called Death Rewind. Every time he died, time would loop back to a previous point. It had been an incredibly popular concept back in his old world. The moment Carla heard those words, she suddenly leaped out of the carriage. Both Takeru and Hinako stared at her in confusion. Carla hurried over to Alice. She asked whether, after joining this caravan, Alice had noticed anything strange. Alice frowned, unsure what she meant. Carla clarified. Had she experienced any sense of déjà vu? If she noticed even the slightest thing, she needed to say so immediately. Alice could only stare at her, completely baffled. Meanwhile, Takeru wondered why Carla had reacted so dramatically. Instead of answering, Carla began reciting a strange series of phrases. The skewered jewel battle, the hide from a newborn, the likeness of the crucified Savior, stepped on, the Black War, the blue flash of Los Alamos, the ships slowly vanished from the shore, the twin spiral staircases ascending the tower. Both Hinako and Takeru looked utterly confused. Just as Carla was about to continue, she suddenly stopped. Then she looked directly at Takeru. She quietly asked whether this really was the first time he had ever met them. Takeru looked even more confused. He wondered if they were somehow supposed to have met before. Carla took a deep breath. She knew that, after receiving a powerful cheat ability and a fresh start in another world, he was probably dreaming of becoming one of those legendary heroes who changed history. Heroes who conquered nations. Heroes who created unimaginable wealth from ordinary stones. Heroes who transformed barren land into endless harvests. But he had arrived far too late. Those days were already over. The people of this world had spent generations adapting to otherworlders exactly like him. Takeru's expression slowly stiffened. He asked what she meant. Carla nervously answered. His ability. Death Rewind. The power to reset time after dying. This world already had established methods for dealing with people who possessed it. Takeru immediately denied it. There was no way that could possibly be true. Hinako then asked whether Carla was referring to the strange words she had recited earlier. Carla nodded. She explained that those phrases were part of a test designed to identify people who had experienced time loops. The real purpose wasn't the words themselves. It was the reaction. People who had lived through previous timelines often showed subtle, involuntary responses when they heard certain trigger phrases. Something as simple as their pupils widening could reveal everything. And after hearing Carla's explanation, the atmosphere inside the carriage suddenly became much heavier. What's even stranger is that everyone around a time looper starts experiencing intense stage of view. Time rewinds are never perfect. Every loop leaves behind a faint feeling that something isn't quite right. Hinako admitted that she had been falling behind in her studies again because she had never heard of that supposedly common knowledge. But Ellis was just as surprised. It was the first time she had heard about it too. Takeru then turned to Carla, bringing up the rumors about overpowered cheat skills making someone unbeatable. Carla thought for a moment before revealing the truth. It was actually the complete opposite. According to her, people in this world see travelers from other worlds as valuable resources to exploit. Among all abilities, Death Rewind is one of the easiest and most profitable powers to take advantage of. That immediately reminded Hinako of the man who had tried to kidnap her. He had mentioned that she could be sold for a huge price. The word sold completely caught Takeru off guard. He had finally made it to another world, only to realize it was basically hard mode from the very beginning. Hinako then noticed how naturally he accepted everything. It reminded her of someone she had met before. Curious, she asked whether he ever wanted to return home, whether he missed his parents. Takeru hesitated. Of course he missed them. They were probably worried sick. But despite that, he genuinely loved being in another world. For the first time in his life, it felt like there was something beyond the future that had already been decided for him. Back in his old world, life felt like walking down a road that had already been mapped out from beginning to end. Every mystery already had an explanation. Science, religion, the universe, everything felt like humanity had already given it an answer. To him, it felt as if there was nowhere left to go. Nothing left to discover. And eventually, nothing left to look forward to. Hinako struggled to understand at first, but she admitted she could relate to one part of his thinking. She believed that gods were originally systems people created to help society survive in ancient times. Takeru agreed that it was something along those lines. Then Hinako casually revealed something that completely surprised him. She was actually a believer. Takeru immediately apologized, worried that he had insulted her faith. But Hinako assured him there was no reason to feel guilty. Her beliefs were much simpler than he imagined. Every day, she quietly offered gratitude to whatever might be listening. And whenever life became unbearable, her prayers always ended with the same desperate plea for help. Everyone listened in silence. Carla then pointed out that Hinako's beliefs sounded surprisingly similar to the people of this world. For generations, they had believed that spirits lived within all things. Hinako explained that the Holy Orthodox Church back home didn't worship one specific, named God. That made Takeru remember something. When they were first transported to this world, they had actually met a goddess. That memory instantly pulled Hinako back. She once stood before a woman who introduced herself as the goddess Teos. Teos explained that Hinako had died in an unforeseen accident, but instead of disappearing forever, she had been granted another life in a different world. All Hinako had to do was choose one blessing to take with her. Rows of treasure chests appeared before her. Each one contained a different gift. Still, Hinako couldn't help asking whether the woman truly was a goddess. Teos calmly confirmed that she governed that world herself. Hinako stared at her for a long moment. Then, instead of choosing a chest, she simply walked past them. The moment she crossed by Teos, the goddess briefly glitched. Without stopping, Hinako continued toward the far wall. As soon as she touched it, a hidden door suddenly appeared. She quietly apologized. Teos might truly be a goddess to someone else. She might genuinely be offering salvation, but Hinako couldn't believe this place was heaven, and she couldn't believe Teos was her god. After confirming the code on the hidden door, Hinako reached her conclusion. A new life, a powerful blessing. None of it mattered, because in her heart, she believed there was only one place she truly belonged. At the end of the memory, Hinako admitted that it had been a strange experience. She simply couldn't reconcile what she had witnessed with her own faith. So instead of accepting the goddess's offer, she chose to walk away. Carla looked at her in disbelief. If Hinako had never accepted a blessing, then that meant she never received a cheat ability at all. She had been living with nothing more than an ordinary code. Takeru was stunned. That meant Hinako had survived every adventure without relying on a cheat from another world. His respect for her shot through the roof. Then, without warning, he made a heartfelt request. He wanted to travel with them. Better yet, he begged Hinako to accept him as her little brother. His face lit up with excitement. Meanwhile, Carla and Ellis looked completely fed up. Alice couldn't hold it in anymore. Not again. As they continued down the road, Takeru joked that a guy barging into a Yuri group had obviously never stood a chance. Hinako tilted her head in confusion, wondering what Yuri had to do with anything. Alice immediately signaled for her not to ask. Unfortunately, Hinako ignored the warning. She casually revealed that she had actually been planning to ask her giant father for permission to start accepting younger siblings of her own. Takeru's hopes instantly came back to life. Still, duty came first. He had to finish escorting the caravans safely to the capital. He wondered whether he was even strong enough to survive the journey. Hinako then revealed that her group was heading to the capital afterward as well. If her father gave his approval, they could talk about becoming siblings when they met again. Takeru couldn't contain his excitement. He threw his arms around Hinako and thanked her over and over. After reminding Carla of something, Hinako and the others finally went their separate ways. Before leaving, Carla stopped Takeru with one last warning. She apologized for not mentioning it sooner. Death Rewind wasn't only used for survival. Many people abused it to scout information over countless loops. If anyone ever approached him while already knowing he was from another world, he needed to be extremely careful. But there was one group he absolutely had to avoid: the High Levels. They disguised themselves as the elves of the forest. If he ever encountered them, he had to activate Death Rewind and escape immediately. Carla tightly grabbed his hand. If they ever captured him, death would be the kinder outcome. Whatever awaited after that was far worse. Takeru swallowed hard. He promised he would be careful. With that, the caravan resumed its journey, and Takeru rode off toward the capital. Not long after, someone called out to him. Looking over, he spotted two young women riding nearby. One of them smiled and asked if it was his first trip to the capital. Takeru hesitated before admitting that it was. The woman grinned. She claims to have excellent hearing and asked whether everything she had overheard was true. Was he really a hero from another world? Takeru immediately denied it. Heroes from another world were famous for receiving powerful cheat abilities. He wasn't one of them. The woman slowly moved closer. Even so, the idea alone sounded incredibly fascinating. Takeru laughed awkwardly and explained that the real otherworlder was his big sister from earlier. He had only just left his village, so meeting someone from another world had been a first for him. The woman simply smiled, saying she had only been curious. Then her companion joined in. The second woman moved to Takeru's other side, trapping him between them. She teased that it was a shame. Several older sisters would have loved to party with someone like him. Takeru forced an awkward laugh. He joked that it really was unfortunate. He couldn't help feeling a little jealous. He wished he really had been one of those legendary heroes. The two women continued chatting, laughing, and closing the distance until Takeru completely lowered his guard. Before he even realized what was happening, he had been kidnapped. By the time he regained his senses, he had been taken to an abandoned building. His hands were restrained. His mouth was covered. And whatever those women truly wanted was only beginning to unfold. Takeru struggled helplessly as the people around him argued over his fate. One of the women complained that this wasn't the share they had agreed on. The man dismissed her concern without hesitation. Takeru was still fresh. That meant they could get plenty of use out of him. The woman reluctantly accepted it and told him not to ruin the merchandise. With that, the two women walked away. Takeru was left behind, completely clueless about what was happening. The man then began making preparations before his master, a high elf, arrived. He calmly arranged severed body parts across the table. The horrifying sight made Takeru freeze. His eyes locked onto one particular arm. At first, he wondered whose it was. Then reality hit. He looked down and realized it was his own arm. Before the man could continue his work, someone entered the room. The man respectfully greeted the newcomer, mentioning that he had arrived earlier than expected. Everything was already prepared. Only the processing remained. The high elf paused. Then he walked over with a look of annoyance. How many times had he been told to wait before preparing the specimens? A strange magical box rested on the table. If the victims panicked too early, they might activate their skills. And among them, Death Rewind was especially troublesome. The assistant immediately apologized. Takeru had simply been too fresh, too young. The high elf nodded. Then he looked at Takeru's body. Perfect timing. He happened to need a replacement. Takeru completely broke down. He cried, begged, and desperately asked why this was happening to him. The high elf calmly began explaining. He asked whether life in this world had seemed easy. The moment someone from another world arrived, beautiful women gathered around them without hesitation. They admired them, listened to every word, praised them endlessly. Was that all driven by greed? It was simply how their society functioned. Otherworlders possessed overwhelming individual power. Humanity had never flourished because of individual strength. Humans survived by working together. Knowledge, tools, faith, gods, ideologies. Those collective systems allowed humanity to rise above every other species. And those same systems made it incredibly easy to reject anyone considered an outsider. Monsters, demons, demi-humans, otherworlders. Takaru could only cry harder. The high elf continued without a trace of sympathy. Did Takaru truly believe he had arrived in an exciting fantasy world? Did he think he would wander through a land of primitive races, enlighten them with his own values, and reshape the world in his own image? The high elf slowly stepped closer. The reality was the exact opposite. To them, the cheat ability wasn't the true gift. The otherworlder himself was a precious offering delivered straight into their hands. And to repay the goddess for such a blessing, they intended to use every single part of his body. Takaru completely lost control. He screamed at the top of his lungs. He begged for anyone to save him. His cries turned into desperate calls for his mother, then for anyone at all. Finally, he cried out to God, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding behind them. Alice, Hinako, and Carla finally reached their destination, the capital city. Then diamonds. After a long journey, the group finally stopped on a hill overlooking a massive city. Alice smiled. They had finally arrived. The capital of Dasmania. The royal capital. Then diamonds. Hinako quietly admired the enormous cities stretching out before her. Noticing her reaction, Alice asked if it was her first time seeing a city that large, especially one built around a castle. Hinako looked confused. A castle? The question caught Alice completely off guard. Then she burst into laughter. First, Hinako didn't know what a hero or demon lord was. Now she didn't even know what a castle was. Carla joined the teasing, reminding Hinako that she was supposed to be everyone's big sister. Alice laughed even harder. At this rate, they'd have to teach her absolutely everything. Hinako let out an annoyed sigh. To her, castles simply weren't anything remarkable. Back in her own world, things like that were everywhere. That answer immediately stunned both Alice and Carla. Carla recalled an old legend from the golden age of the ancient civilization. Long ago, people supposedly built a ship capable of traveling through the stars. After it crashed, later generations built their capital around its wreckage and turned it into their castle. Alice couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had never imagined Hinako's original world was even more advanced than that. For a moment, she even wondered if Hinako had come from an entirely different world than the other known travelers. Realizing she had bragged a little too much, Hinako awkwardly apologized. Soon, the group reached the city gates. Hinako noticed an enormous line of people waiting to enter. Yet another entrance nearby was moving much faster. Carla explained the reason. The capital was the center of the Holy Orthodox Church's influence. Because of that, discrimination against demi-humans was stronger there than anywhere else. Anyone entering the city faced strict inspections. Carla reminded Alice not to cause any trouble. Alice brushed it off, insisting she knew how to behave. Then she suddenly paused. Did Carla just mention discrimination against demi-humans? Before anyone could continue, a voice stopped them. An adventurer ordered the giant to stay where she was. There would be no entry for her. Hinako was confused. She had been told that anyone willing to undergo inspection could enter the capital. The adventurer coldly corrected her. Otherworlders and demi-humans might be tolerated, but giants were nothing more than filthy creatures on the same level as demons and monsters. There was no place for them inside the capital. Alice immediately clenched her fists. Hinako was visibly hurt by the insult. She stepped forward, ready to defend the pride of giants. But Alice quickly stopped her. She insisted it wasn't worth it. The insults didn't bother her. Hinako refused to accept that. She couldn't simply let such words go unanswered. The moment she moved, the adventurers instantly pointed their weapons at her. They warned her not to resist. A tense silence filled the entrance. Even Alice began to look nervous. Then Carla stepped forward. With a single command, she silenced everyone. She asked the guards if they had any idea who they were speaking to. The guards scoffed, calling her a brat and demanding the same answer from her. Without another word, Carla revealed the necklace around her neck. Its emblem instantly changed everything. The guards froze. One of them recognized the crest immediately. It belonged to Count Bernard I of the frontier. The other quickly demanded to know her identity. Carla calmly explained that the people beside her were companions from the frontier. Out there, demi-humans living alongside humans was completely normal. Had they really never heard of that? The guards still hesitated. Anyone could carry a fake crest. How could they be certain it was genuine? And exactly what was her relationship to Lord Bernard I? Carla's expression instantly turned cold. She had tried to settle the matter peacefully, even after they insulted her friends. But they had completely ignored her goodwill. Then she casually reminded them of one small fact. The frontier fought demons every single day. Fresh soldiers were always in short supply. Perhaps She should recommend the 2 guards to her uncle for frontline duty. Before she could even ask their names, the guards immediately panicked. They begged for forgiveness on the spot. And right there at the city gates, the entire entrance fell into chaos. Carla finally relaxed after everything that had happened. But the moment Alice and Hinako looked her way, her nerves came right back. Hinako admitted she never realized Carla was someone so important. Carla quickly brushed it off. She explained that she was only the daughter of a low-ranking noble. The only reason people recognized her was because of her uncle, Bernard I. Carrying his family crest simply made traveling easier. Ironically, that same crest was also the reason human traffickers targeted her in the first place. Hinako quietly listened. Alice wasn't convinced. She pointed out that Carla had traveled all the way from the lands near the demon frontier to the capital completely on her own. Surviving a journey like that without a scratch was far too impressive for an ordinary noble's daughter. Carla instinctively backed away as Alice continued pressing her with suspicious questions. Before the interrogation could continue, Hinako stepped in. She apologized to Carla for putting her through all of that right after she had helped them. Carla simply smiled and let it go. But Alice still wasn't satisfied. Just then, the ground suddenly began to rumble. Carla immediately shifted her attention and reminded the man-eaters to stay hidden. The monsters obediently disappeared into a nearby pile of trash, keeping themselves completely out of sight. With that settled, the group continued exploring the city. Hinako couldn't help noticing how crowded everything was. Alice explained that this was the capital, one of the largest cities in the world. Similar massive cities existed in the Northern Empire and the Southern Judicial Nation as well. Carla added that the crowds were even larger than usual because today was the solar eclipse festival. Hinako was surprised that this world experienced eclipses too. Everywhere they looked, people were preparing for the celebration. One cheerful merchant caught Hinako's attention. She walked over and casually asked how much it would cost to buy every piece of meat he had. The merchant burst into laughter, amused that someone so small could ask for such an enormous purchase. Hinako calmly made it clear she meant every single piece. The merchant finally looked at the group more carefully. His expression immediately changed. After realizing they were demi-humans, he refused to sell them anything, pointing to a sign that banned service to gods and demi-humans. Hinako's mood instantly darkened. Alice and Carla immediately realized trouble was about to start. Without wasting a second, Alice signaled for everyone to leave. At the same time, another passerby grabbed the merchant and pulled him away before things escalated. As Alice tried to calm herself, another man quietly offered them water. Instead of helping, it only made her expression even colder. Carla understood exactly how angry Alice felt. Still, she reminded her that they were standing in the middle of the capital and begged her not to cause a scene. Thinking quickly, Carla pointed toward a huge crowd gathering nearby. A major event was about to begin. The distraction worked. The girls spotted rows of clothing prepared for sale and wondered if one of them was meant for Takeru. Carla remembered that they were supposed to meet up with him again. Hinako pointed out that if Takeru changed clothes, finding him afterward would become even harder. They made their way toward the city's central plaza. The place was packed. People crowded around a massive stage while others browsed countless festival stalls. The entire square buzzed with excitement. Alice figured they would stand out too much if they moved any closer. From where they stood, it was obvious that nearly everyone was waiting for the auction to resume. Carla explained that auctions during the solar eclipse festival often featured incredibly rare treasures and powerful weapons. Even spectators who had no intention of bidding came just to witness the spectacle. Moments later, the auction resumed. The host energized the crowd as he welcomed everyone back. After thanking the audience, he announced the final item of this year's solar eclipse festival auction. According to him, the last item was worthy of serving as the grand finale. Its value, he claimed, would be obvious to anyone with a truly discerning eye. And with the entire plaza watching, the mysterious item was finally about to be revealed. The auction host raised the excitement even higher. The final item wasn't just rare. It was considered an essential treasure for any legendary adventurer. According to the host, it was a sacred relic capable of defeating death itself. As the cloth covering the item was removed, the crowd erupted with excitement. The treasure was revealed. A save point. People cheered as rumors surrounding the artifact spread through the audience. It was said that anyone who possessed it could return to a previously marked location even after dying. The bidding immediately began. The opening price was set at 1,000 gold. Within seconds, the offers climbed. 1,500, 2,500, 3,000. The numbers kept rising without hesitation. Hinako had no idea what a save point actually was, but it certainly sounded incredibly useful. Alice admitted she had only heard vague rumors about such an item and never believed it truly existed. The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. It felt less like a magical artifact, and more like another one of the unfair advantages possessed by otherworlders. Then they noticed Carla. She was trembling. Tears streamed down her face. With obvious anger and grief, she admitted that Alice was right. Owning a save point wasn't simply powerful. It was outright cheating. Alice and Hinako stared at her in confusion. Carla broke down even harder. She revealed that they knew exactly where those powers came from. Then she asked a terrifying question. How many people did they think actually possessed an ability like that? The realization slowly began to sink in. Alice immediately sensed where this was leading. Hinako remained speechless. Carla finally revealed the horrifying truth. The save point wasn't a naturally created sacred treasure. It was manufactured by humans, through the processing of otherworlders. Alice froze. The word alone sent a chill through her entire body. Processing. If that was true, then what exactly had happened to Takeru? As the crowd continued celebrating, the host casually explained how the artifact worked. The save point functioned by extracting the death rewind ability from its source before linking that power to its owner through a magical spell. Once connected, the owner could repeatedly return from death as many times as needed. Alice barely heard another word. Her mind was already racing. If the ability had been extracted, then where was Takeru? Still crying, Carla pointed toward the display case. She quietly revealed the horrifying answer. He was inside the box. Alice's eyes widened in disbelief. Carla explained that almost nothing remained of him. Only his brain and heart had been left intact. The spell sustaining the artifact also kept him alive. He could never truly die. No matter what happened, the magic would continue preserving him forever. Alice finally understood. That was Takeru's death rewind ability. It had never disappeared. It had been stolen. Hinako stood in complete silence. Her face slowly darkened as the horrifying reality finally sank in. Meanwhile, the bidding reached its conclusion. A young woman with the appearance of an adventurer suddenly offered 50,000 gold. The massive bid stunned even the auction host. No one dared raise the price further. With no more challengers, the save point was officially sold. But the host wasn't finished. He cheerfully encouraged everyone to keep shopping. Even though the auction had ended, there were still plenty of otherworlder products available. Stuffed and magically shrunken trophies. Handmade accessories crafted from otherworlders. Perfect souvenirs, according to the host. Hinako lowered her head. The people around them applauded. They accepted every bit of this cruelty without hesitation. Alice explained that this kingdom prided itself on law and order. Unlike the Northern Empire, slavery was illegal, and human rights were deeply respected. But there was one cruel exception. Demi-humans who lived in nature, and people summoned from other worlds, were not considered human at all. Those rights only belonged to humans. To everyone else, they were nothing more than inferior races. And in this kingdom, that belief was perfectly legal. Alice quietly explained that this wasn't just prejudice. It was doctrine. The church taught these beliefs, and both the nation's laws and its faith reinforced them. To the people of this kingdom, otherworlders and demi-humans simply weren't human. Hinako's bell suddenly rang. Its sharp tone carried an unmistakable sense of command. Alice immediately noticed. Before anything could happen, Carla rushed to stop her. She begged Hinako not to start a fight. If they caused chaos here, they wouldn't just be making enemies of a few people. They would be declaring war on an entire nation. Hinako refused to back down. The boy who had almost become their little brother. She couldn't abandon him. No matter what, they had to save him. Carla broke into tears again. She desperately explained that there was nothing left to save. His body was gone. His eyes had been taken. His ears had been removed. Even his skin had been stripped away. He could no longer see. He could no longer hear. He couldn't even feel anything. Worst of all, she couldn't even grant him the mercy of death. Hinako fell silent. Carla turned toward Alice, begging her to talk some sense into her. Alice calmly called Hinako's name. Then she revealed exactly how she felt. If Hinako truly wanted it, she wouldn't hesitate to kill every single person in that plaza. Carla's sobs only grew louder. Alice looked at the celebrating crowd with disgust. To her, the people responsible, and even those applauding them, were no better than beasts. If it meant ending Takeru's suffering, she was prepared to unleash the full extent of her power. Hinako's resolve never wavered. The bell rang once more. Its sound echoed across the plaza. A child's cheerful voice cut through the tension. A young boy excitedly told his father how much fun he was having. The three girls instinctively turned toward the family. The boy's mother gently teased him, saying the auction had been in terrible taste. Instead, the boy pointed excitedly toward another festival stall. His father happily agreed to take him there and promised to buy whatever he wanted. His wife reminded him not to spend too much. Checking the few coins in his hand, the man smiled. He admitted he had skipped lunch that day so they could afford a little extra for their son. His wife sighed. She couldn't help thinking about how merchants and nobles made fortunes from terrible things, while her husband, a royal knight, had to sacrifice even a simple meal. Before she could finish, he quietly interrupted. He reminded her that he was still just a commoner. Royal knight sounded prestigious, but there were countless knights just like him. Their son looked up with admiration. He asked if his father was one of the knights who protected everyone. His father proudly answered yes. Protecting the people of this country was his duty. The three girls watched the family in silence. At that moment, Ellis and Hinako realized they couldn't do it. Not here. Not now. Without another word, they turned away and left the plaza behind. As they walked through the city, Hinako kept her head lowered. The weight of everything she had learned refused to leave her mind. Carla quietly called out to her. Hinako finally spoke. She remembered how excited Takeru had been when he first arrived in this world. Back then, she knew nothing about being transported to another world. But listening to him, she believed he had finally found a place where he could become someone special. Carla's eyes filled with tears once again. She softly explained that children were the same in every world. They all dreamed of exploring the unknown. They all longed for grand adventures. But reality was never that simple. There was no convenient fantasy world with one obvious villain waiting to be defeated. Society, beliefs. Those invisible forces slowly shaped everyone who lived within them. Even the demon lord wasn't truly the enemy. Hinako suddenly stopped walking. She quietly disagreed. For her, there was an enemy, and that enemy had a name. Ellis immediately looked toward Hinako. Something had changed. An unfamiliar presence had frozen all three of them in place. Even Carla couldn't understand what was happening. Hinako slowly lifted her eyes. Standing before her was someone she never expected to see again. Someone from her own past. Her older sister. The woman stared at Hinako in complete disbelief. Then, together with the people beside her, she recognized the familiar face. Hinako had finally been found.